The bullet that changed everything didn't come from an enemy. It came from a choice. When Colt Maddox found a dying stranger collapsed at his gate, he should have walked away. She was trouble written in blood and bruises, hunted by forces he couldn't understand. But something in her defiant eyes, still burning despite exhaustion, reminded him what it meant to fight when the world demanded surrender. One night. That's all he promised her. But some nights change everything. Stay with me until the end of this story. Hit that like button and comment which city you're watching from. I want to see how far this tale travels. The land stretched endlessly in every direction, a vast canvas of amber grass and scattered mesquite that seemed to swallow the sky whole. Out here, silence wasn't just the absence of sound. It was a living thing, thick and deliberate, pressing against the eardrums with the weight of isolation. The sun hung low on the western horizon, painting the scattered clouds in shades of rust and copper, bleeding light across a world that cared nothing for human ambition or suffering. Colt Maddox had learned to love that indifference. His boots crunched against the hardpack as he guided his bay mare toward the barn, the leather reins loose in his calloused hands. The horse knew the way home better than he did these days. 15 years of the same evening routine had carved the path into instinct. His shoulders ached from mending the north fence line, a job that never seemed finished, no matter how many posts he replaced or how much wire he stretched tight. The ranch wasn't large by frontier standards, just enough land to run a modest herd and maintain the illusion of purpose. But it was his. Every broken fence post, every sun-bleached board, every acre of stubborn soil that refused easy cultivation, all of it belonged to him and him alone. No partners to disappoint, no family to fail, no expectations beyond what he could meet with his own two hands. The mare's ears suddenly pricked forward. Colt's hand instinctively moved toward the rifle in his saddle scabbard, though he didn't draw it. Out here, every unexpected movement demanded attention. Coyotes usually waited until full dark. Cattle rustlers preferred moonless nights. Honest travelers stuck to the main road 5 miles south. Then he saw her. At first, his mind struggled to process what his eyes were showing him. Near the eastern corral, where the split-rail fence met the watering trough, a figure stood, swayed, like a tree about to fall. Even from 50 yards away, he could see she was tall, taller than any woman he'd ever encountered, her frame broad-shouldered and powerful despite the way she leaned against the fence post for support. Her clothes were torn, dark stains spreading across the fabric in patterns that made his gut tighten. Blood. Not fresh, but not old either. One hand clutched the fence rail with white-knuckled desperation, while the other pressed against her ribs. Her head turned toward the sound of his approach, and even in the failing light, he caught the glint of eyes that held no surrender. Colt reined in the mare 20 feet away, close enough to assess the threat, far enough to react if needed. His right hand stayed near the rifle, though something told him this woman wasn't dangerous. Not to him, anyway. Not in her current condition. "You're on private land," he said, his voice rough from a day of silence. It wasn't a question. The woman didn't respond immediately. Her chest rose and fell with obvious effort, each breath seeming to cost her something. When she finally spoke, her voice carried an accent he couldn't quite place. The words were English, but shaped by a tongue that had learned other languages first. "I know." 2 words, flat and honest. No apology, no explanation. Colt studied her more carefully. She was young, perhaps mid-20s, with dark hair pulled back from a face that might have been striking under different circumstances. Now it was pale beneath its natural bronze tone, drawn tight with pain and exhaustion. She wore what looked like modified travel clothes, practical, durable, designed for hard use, the kind of gear someone wore when running from something, or toward something. "You need a doctor," he said, though the nearest town was 15 miles east, and the doctor there was better suited to setting broken bones on ranch hands than treating whatever had happened to this woman. "No doctor." Her jaw set with stubborn determination. "No town, just—" She paused, seeming to gather strength for the next words. "Just tonight. One night. Then I'm gone." Every instinct Colt had developed over 15 years of solitary living screamed at him to refuse, to point her toward the main road and wish her luck. He'd built his entire existence on the principle of distance, from people, from complications, from the kind of choices that led to regret. But something in the way she stood, Refusing to collapse despite obvious agony, meeting his gaze without begging or demanding, reminded him of something he'd thought he'd forgotten. It reminded him of the man he used to be before the war, before the losses, before he'd learned that caring about people only led to burying them. One night, he heard himself say, the words coming out before the rational part of his brain could stop them. "You can sleep in the barn. There's a cot in the tack room." Relief flickered across her face, so brief he almost missed it. She pushed away from the fence post, and immediately her left leg buckled. Colt was off the mare before conscious thought engaged, catching her by the arm before she hit the ground. She was heavier than he expected, solid muscle and bone, not delicate at all, and the small grunt of pain she made when he steadied her suggested broken ribs, or worse. "Come on," he said, adjusting his grip. "Barn first, then we'll see about those injuries." She didn't argue, which told him more about her condition than any words could. Together they made slow progress across the yard, her weight leaning heavily against his shoulder. The mare followed unbidden, well-trained enough to know the evening routine didn't end until she was unsaddled and fed. The barn doors stood open, swinging gently in the evening breeze that had started to pick up from the east. Inside, the familiar smells of hay and leather and horse sweat wrapped around them like a worn blanket. Colt guided her past the stalls. Only 3 of his 6 horses were in tonight, the others still out in the south pasture, to the small tack room at the back. The cot was exactly where he'd told her, a simple canvas and wood frame he sometimes used when he needed to keep watch over a sick animal. Beside it sat a wooden crate that served as a makeshift table, currently holding nothing but dust and a burned-down candle. She collapsed onto the cot with another suppressed sound of pain, her eyes closing briefly. Sweat beaded on her forehead despite the cooling evening air. "I'll get water," Colt said, "and the medical kit." Her eyes opened. "You don't have to—" "You're bleeding on my cot," he interrupted, not unkindly. "I'm going to at least make sure you don't die in my barn. Bad for property values." The corner of her mouth twitched, almost a smile. "Practical. Out here, practical keeps you alive." He left her there and headed back to the house, his mind racing despite his outward calm. The house was a simple 4-room structure he'd built himself over 3 summers. Bedroom, kitchen, main room, and a small washroom he'd added 2 years ago as a concession to civilization. Everything inside was organized with military precision, each item in its designated place. Nothing superfluous or decorative. He grabbed the medical kit from under the kitchen sink. A battered metal box that held bandages, a bottle of whiskey for disinfecting, needle and thread for the serious injuries, and various herbs he'd learned to use for everything else. The water bucket on the counter was still half full from his morning coffee, clean and cold. When he returned to the barn, she hadn't moved except to prop herself against the wall, her eyes tracking him with alert wariness despite her obvious pain. A survivor's instinct. He recognized it because he carried the same watchfulness himself. "Let me see," he said, setting down the water bucket and kit. She hesitated, then slowly began to unbutton the heavy shirt she wore. Underneath was a simple cotton undershirt, now stained dark with blood along her left side. The fabric had stuck to the wound, and when she tried to pull it free, she hissed through her teeth. "Wait." Colt dampened a cloth in the water bucket. "Let me. The cloth will tear the wound open worse if you just rip it." She nodded, leaning back to give him access. Her jaw was clenched tight enough that he could see the muscle jumping beneath her skin. Carefully, he worked the wet cloth against the dried blood and fabric, slowly loosening the adhesion. The wound beneath, when he finally exposed it, made him pause. A deep gash ran along her ribs, perhaps 6 inches long, the edges still seeping. The cut was clean, knife work, not an accident. "Someone tried to gut you," he observed quietly. "Someone tried." Her voice was steady. "They failed." "What about the person who did this?" "Not a concern anymore." Colt decided not to pursue that line of questioning. He'd lived long enough on the frontier to know when details were better left unexamined. Instead, he focused on cleaning the wound, his movements efficient and gentle. She bore it without complaint, though her breathing grew shallower and her hands gripped the edge of the cot hard enough that her knuckles went white. "This needs stitches," he said after a moment. "I can do it, but it's going to hurt like hell. The whiskey helps." She met his eyes. "Do it." He retrieved the whiskey from the kit, offering her the bottle first. She took it without hesitation, swallowing 3 long pulls before handing it back. Color returned to her cheeks, though whether from the alcohol or pure determination, he couldn't say. The stitching took 20 minutes. She didn't cry out, but twice she had to grab his wrist and make him pause while she breathed through the worst of it. Her grip was strong enough that he suspected she could have broken his wrist if she'd wanted to. When he finally tied off the last stitch, she exhaled shakily and reached for the whiskey again. "Other injuries?" he asked, sitting back on his heels. She moved her shoulder experimentally, wincing. "Bruised ribs, maybe cracked. Left ankle is twisted but not broken. Various cuts and bruises that don't matter. That ankle won't support you properly for days." "It'll have to." She took another drink, smaller this time. "I can't stay longer than tomorrow night. Because whoever's hunting you will find you here." It wasn't a question, but she answered anyway. "Yes." Colt stood, wiping his hands on a clean cloth. Through the barn doors, the last light was fading from the sky, purple bleeding into black at the eastern edge. Soon it would be full dark, the kind of darkness that only existed far from cities and their artificial lights. "I'm making dinner," he said. "You should eat something." "I don't want to impose "You already are." He picked up the water bucket and medical kit. "Might as well impose properly. Can you walk to the house, or should I bring something out here?" She pushed herself to standing, testing the injured ankle. Pain flashed across her face, but she remained upright. "I can walk?" Stubborn. Practical. She echoed his earlier word with that almost smile again. The walk to the house took longer than it should have, her movements careful and measured. Colt found himself unconsciously matching her pace, staying close enough to catch her if she fell, but far enough to preserve her pride. The evening air had turned cool, carrying the scent of sage and distant water from the creek that marked his southern boundary. Inside the house, he gestured her toward one of the 2 chairs at the small kitchen table while he moved to the stove. Dinner was simple: beans he'd cooked that morning, cornbread from yesterday, and strips of dried venison he rehydrated in a pan with some of the beans. Frontier food, designed for efficiency rather than flavor, but filling and nutritious. She watched him work with the same alert attention she'd shown since he first found her. Cataloging, he realized. Exits, weapons, threats. The rifle above the door, the knife block on the counter, the window over the sink that looked east toward the main road. "What's your name?" he asked as he set plates on the table. She hesitated, as if the question itself was dangerous. "Tala." "Tala," he repeated, testing the unfamiliar syllables. "I'm Colt. Colt Maddox. I saw it on the post at your gate." He nodded, unsurprised. Of course she'd been observant enough to notice. He pulled the second chair back and sat, gesturing at her plate. "Eat." They ate in silence for several minutes. Colt had lived alone long enough that quiet during meals felt natural rather than awkward. Tala seemed equally comfortable with it, focused entirely on the food with the single-minded attention of someone who hadn't eaten properly in days. It was only after she'd cleared half her plate that she spoke again. "Why are you helping me?" The question was direct, stripped of social niceties. Colt appreciated that. "Honestly?" He set down his fork. "I'm not entirely sure." "Most people wouldn't. They'd see trouble and turn away." "Most people would." He met her gaze. "Maybe I'm not most people. Or maybe I just got tired of always being practical." "That's not an answer." "No," he admitted. "It's not." She studied him for a long moment, her dark eyes searching his face for something he couldn't name. Whatever she found there seemed to satisfy her because she nodded slightly and returned to her meal. After dinner, Colt showed her where the washroom was and gave her one of his old shirts to sleep in. The torn, blood-stained clothes she'd been wearing needed to be burned or at least buried. She accepted both offerings without false modesty, the kind of person who understood that survival sometimes meant accepting help. "The cot in the barn," she began, "is exactly where you'll sleep," he finished. "I don't have a spare bedroom, and we both need rest without worrying about the other one." Relief flickered in her eyes again. She'd been concerned about impropriety, he realized, or perhaps worried that his help came with unspoken expectations. The fact that he'd preemptively addressed it seemed to ease something in her stance. "Thank you," she said simply. "One night," he reminded her. "Tomorrow, you'll need to move on." I know. But as he walked her back to the barn through the star-filled darkness, Colt found himself wondering if either of them truly believed that. There was something about this woman, this Tala, that suggested she wasn't the kind of problem that resolved itself in 24 hours. He waited while she settled onto the cot, watching her careful movements as she favored her injured side. The barn cats had emerged from wherever they spent their days, two orange tabbies who immediately claimed spots near her feet as if they'd known her all their lives. "If you need anything," he said from the doorway, "the house is 100 yards straight across the yard. Don't hesitate." "I'll be fine." "I'm sure you will be." He paused. "But the offer stands." Back in the house, Colt went through his evening routine by rote, banking the stove's fire, checking the door latch, laying out his clothes for morning. But his mind kept returning to the woman in his barn, to the question she'd raised simply by existing. Who was hunting her? Why? And what had she done that made running seem preferable to fighting? He lay in bed staring at the ceiling, listening to the familiar sounds of the ranch at night. The creak of wood settling, the distant call of a nighthawk, the soft whisper of wind through the eaves. And underneath it all, the awareness of another presence on his land. The first time in 15 years he'd shared this space with another human being. Sleep came slowly, and when it did, his dreams were full of ghosts he'd thought he'd buried long ago. Dawn arrived with the same relentless inevitability it always did on the frontier. Colt woke before the sun cleared the horizon, his internal clock as reliable as any timepiece. He dressed quickly in the pre-dawn gray, pulling on worn jeans and a work shirt that had seen better years. Through his bedroom window, he could just make out the dark shape of the barn against the lightening eastern sky. Was she still there? Or had she slipped away during the night, vanishing like morning mist? Only one way to find out. The morning air carried a bite that promised autumn wasn't far off, despite the heat that would arrive by midday. Colt crossed the yard with long strides, his boots leaving dark tracks in the dew-heavy grass. A mockingbird was already singing somewhere in the mesquite, running through its repertoire of borrowed songs. The barn door stood ajar, exactly as he'd left it. Inside, the horses nickered softly at his arrival, hopeful for their morning grain. But Colt's attention went straight to the tack room. Tala sat on the edge of the cot, already awake, already dressed in her cleaned and mended clothes. She looked better than she had the previous evening. Some color had returned to her face, and her eyes were clearer. But the careful way she moved suggested the pain hadn't gone anywhere. "Morning," he said from the doorway. "Morning." She'd been tying her boots but paused to look up at him. "I was about to leave." "Not without breakfast, you're not." It came out more forcefully than he'd intended. "You're not in any condition to travel on an empty stomach." She opened her mouth to argue, then seemed to reconsider. One meal," he agreed. This time he let her make her own way to the house, following a few paces behind in case her ankle gave out. It held, though he could see the effort it cost her to keep her gait even. Pride, he thought, or maybe just the kind of discipline learned through hard experience. Breakfast was simpler than dinner had been, coffee strong enough to strip paint, eggs from his small flock of chickens, and more of yesterday's cornbread. They ate at the same table, in the same chairs, falling into the same comfortable silence. But this time Colt found himself studying her more openly. In the morning light streaming through the kitchen window, he could see details he'd missed before. A scar along her jawline, mostly hidden by her hairline, calluses on her hands that spoke of hard work and weapon use, the way she sat positioned to see both the door and the window simultaneously, never fully relaxing even while eating. "How far are you planning to go?" he asked after his second cup of coffee. "Far enough. That's not a distance. It's the only distance that matters." She set down her fork, meeting his eyes. "The less you know, the safer you are." "I'm already involved. The moment I stitched that wound, I became part of whatever this is." "No." Her voice was firm. "You showed kindness to a stranger. That's all. When I leave, that ends. And if whoever's hunting you comes asking questions, tell them the truth. A woman stopped here for one night and moved on. You don't know her name, don't know where she went. They'll have no reason to doubt you." Colt leaned back in his chair, considering. She was right, technically. He could play ignorant, and there'd be no evidence to suggest otherwise. But something about the scenario felt wrong, like a badly shuffled deck of cards. "What did you do?" he asked quietly. "That made you worth hunting?" Tala's expression didn't change, but something shuddered behind her eyes. "I said no." "To what?" "To control. To being used. To following orders that would have made me," she paused, searching for the right word, "less than what I am." It was the most she'd revealed since arriving, and Colt could hear the weight behind each word. He'd known enough soldiers, enough survivors, to recognize the sound of someone who'd escaped something they'd rather die than return to. "Your people?" he guessed. "Not anymore." There was finality in those two words, like a door closing and locking. "I have no people. I'm alone." "Seems we have that in common." She looked at him sharply, reassessing. "You chose to be alone. I was forced to it. Those aren't the same thing." "Maybe not," he conceded, "but the result is similar enough." They finished breakfast without further conversation. Afterward, Tala helped clear the table despite his protests, moving with stiff determination. When everything was washed and put away, she turned to face him with obvious reluctance. "I should go now." "Your ankle's still swollen. Another day of rest would be a risk I can't afford." She moved toward the door, then paused. "Thank you, Colt Maddox, for the night, the food, the stitches, for not asking too many questions." He followed her onto the porch, watching as she descended the steps with careful precision. The morning sun had fully risen now, painting everything in shades of gold and amber. It would be a beautiful day, the kind that made the harshness of frontier life seem almost bearable. "Wait," he heard himself say. She turned, one hand on the porch railing. "The north fence line needs work," he said, the words coming out before he'd fully thought them through. "And the well pump's been making a strange noise. Couple days of work, maybe 3. I could use an extra pair of hands." "You're offering me a job?" "I'm offering you a few more days to heal before you run off and get yourself killed." He crossed his arms. "Call it payment for the medical attention. 3 days of work, then you go wherever you were planning to go anyway. But at least you'll go with a fighting chance." Tala stared at him, her expression unreadable. He could see her calculating, weighing risks and benefits with the cold precision of someone used to making decisions that meant life or death. 3 days, she finally said. "Then I'm gone." 3 days, he agreed. Neither of them acknowledged the lie they were telling themselves, that 3 days would be enough, that whatever she was running from would wait that long, that a few days of safety could possibly be sufficient for either of them. But lies, Colt had learned, sometimes made better companions than truth. "Come on," he said, stepping off the porch. "Let's start with the fence line. Easy work, and it'll keep you moving without aggravating that ankle too much." They walked together toward the barn, morning shadows stretching long before them. Behind them, the house stood solid and quiet, a testament to years of solitary discipline. But ahead, the fence line waited, broken and in need of repair, much like both the people approaching it. And in that moment, neither of them realized they'd already crossed a threshold far more significant than any property line. They'd chosen to stop being alone, if only for 3 days. Sometimes, 3 days was all it took to change everything. The fence repair was methodical, almost meditative work. Colt had done it so many times he could practically complete the task without conscious thought. Pull the old wire, check the post for rot, string new wire, secure it properly. But having Tala there changed the rhythm of it. She was a quick study, watching him complete the first section before stepping in to help with the second. Her hands moved with surprising dexterity despite the obvious pain she was still in, and she anticipated what he needed before he had to ask. The silence between them wasn't uncomfortable, but it was different from the silence he usually worked in. It was shared rather than solitary. By mid-morning, they'd completed nearly 20 yards of fence line. The sun had climbed high enough to turn the work sweaty, and Colt called for a break. They sat in the shade of a gnarled oak that marked the northeast corner of his property, passing a canteen of water back and forth. "You've done this before," he observed. "Fence work?" "No." She wiped sweat from her forehead. "But I learned fast. Survival skill." "What other survival skills do you have?" She glanced at him, seeming to measure how much to reveal. "Tracking. Navigation without maps or compass. How to start a fire in wet conditions. Which plants are edible and which will kill you." How to fight when fighting is the only option left. Sounds like military training. Something like that. She took another drink from the canteen. Your people train warriors, yes? Soldiers? Yes. Mine do too, but our warriors serve different purposes. Her jaw tightened. Or they did, before I refused to serve at all. Colt wanted to ask more, but the expression on her face suggested she'd already revealed more than she intended. Instead, he pushed himself to his feet, offering her a hand up. She took it, and for a moment their eyes met and held. There was something there. Not attraction exactly, but recognition. Two damaged people acknowledging the damage in each other without flinching from it. Back to work? She asked. Back to work. The afternoon passed in similar fashion. They worked through the heat of the day, stopping only briefly for water and to move to shadier sections when possible. Tala never complained, though Colt noticed her favoring her injured side more heavily as the hours wore on. When he finally called it for the day, the sun was already sinking toward the western horizon. You push yourself too hard, he said as they walked back toward the barn, pot calling the kettle black. Fair point. He couldn't help a small smile. But I'm not recovering from a knife wound. Neither am I. At his skeptical look, she amended, I'm healing from one. There's a difference. Dinner that night was leftover beans and fresh bread Colt had baked while Tala washed up. They'd fallen into an easy routine already, each moving around the small kitchen without getting in the other's way. It felt almost natural, which should have worried him more than it did. Tell me about this place, Tala said as they ate. How long have you been here? 15 years. Built the house myself over 3 summers. Added the barn the 4th year. Been expanding the grazing land bit by bit ever since. 15 years alone. Yes. Why? It was his turn to deflect. Same reason you're running. Sometimes alone is safer. I'm not running by choice. Aren't you? He met her eyes. You could have fought, could have stayed and faced whatever consequences your refusal brought. But you chose to leave instead. That's a choice, Tala, even if it doesn't feel like one. She set down her fork slowly, her expression hardening. You don't know anything about my situation. You're right, I don't. He kept his voice level. But I know about running, and I know the difference between running from something and running toward something. Question is, which one are you doing? Both, she said after a long pause. I'm running from what I was being forced to become, and I'm running toward, I don't know yet, but something different, something that belongs to me. Freedom. Yes. The word came out fierce. Freedom to choose my own path, to make my own mistakes, to live or die by my own decisions rather than someone else's will. Colt nodded slowly, understanding more than she probably realized. That's worth running for. And you? She challenged. What did you run from? He stood, collecting their empty plates, buying time to decide how much truth to offer. In the end, he settled for the simple version, the one that didn't require him to excavate 15 years of carefully buried grief. I ran from who I used to be, he said, and out here, I found someone I could live with. Was it worth it? He considered the question honestly. Ask me again in 3 days. That night, as Tala settled into the barn cot for the second time, Colt found himself standing on his porch longer than usual, staring at the distant silhouette of the barn against the star-filled sky. 2 days left of their agreement. 2 days before she'd leave and his life would return to its carefully constructed solitude. The thought should have brought relief. Instead, it sat heavy in his chest like undigested food. He turned and went inside, locking the door behind him with more force than necessary. Tomorrow, they'd work on the well pump. Physical labor to fill the hours and distract from the questions neither of them wanted to answer. It would have to be enough. Inside the barn, Tala lay on the cot, staring at the shadowed rafters overhead. Her ribs ached with every breath, and her ankle throbbed despite the rest. But worse than the physical pain was the growing realization that 3 days wouldn't be enough. Not enough time to heal, not enough time to plan her next move, not enough time to understand why this quiet rancher with his careful walls and damaged eyes made her feel safer than she'd felt in years. She closed her eyes, forcing herself to breathe slowly despite the pain. 3 days. Then she'd run again, because running was all she knew how to do anymore. But for tonight, just for tonight, she'd let herself rest beneath a stranger's roof and pretend that safety could last longer than morning. Outside, the frontier night wrapped around them both, vast and indifferent and full of stars that had witnessed countless stories of survival and loss. And in the darkness, neither Colt nor Tala could see what was already approaching on the horizon, though both of them felt it in their bones. The past never stayed buried forever. The second morning dawned cooler than the first. A whisper of changing seasons carried on the wind that swept down from the distant mountains. Colt woke to the sound of movement outside his window. Not the usual morning stirrings of livestock, but something more deliberate. Human movement. He was at the window in seconds, rifle in hand, his heart hammering against his ribs. But the tension drained away when he recognized Tala's silhouette near the water pump, already working despite the early hour. She moved stiffly, testing the mechanism with careful hands, her dark hair loose around her shoulders instead of pulled back as it had been yesterday. Colt set the rifle down with a quiet exhale, running a hand through his own sleep-tangled hair. He'd spent half the night listening for sounds that never came, riders approaching, gunshots, anything that would justify the unease crawling beneath his skin. But the night had remained peaceful, broken only by the usual chorus of crickets and the occasional call of a hunting owl. By the time he'd dressed and made it outside, Tala had already identified the problem with the pump. She looked up at his approach, and he caught a flash of something in her expression, satisfaction maybe, or pride at having solved the puzzle without help. "The valve seal is cracked," she said without preamble, pointing to the base of the pump housing. "It's losing pressure on the upstroke. Probably been getting worse for weeks." Colt crouched beside her, examining where she indicated. She was right. He could see the hairline fracture in the rubber seal, barely visible, but enough to compromise the whole mechanism. He'd been meaning to check it for days, but kept putting it off, the way he put off most things that didn't demand immediate attention. "Good eye," he said. "I told you. I learn fast." She stood, favoring her injured ankle less than yesterday. "Do you have a replacement seal?" "Should have one in the tool shed. If not, I'll need to ride into town." Something flickered across her face at the mention of town. Fear, maybe, or calculation. "How far?" 15 miles east, 4 hours round trip if the mayor's feeling cooperative." He studied her reaction. "You'd be alone here for most of the day?" "I can handle alone." "That's not what concerns me." He straightened, meeting her eyes. "If someone comes looking while I'm gone—" "They won't find me," she interrupted. "I know how to disappear." "Into what?" "There's open ground for miles in every direction. The only real cover is the creek bed, and that's half a mile south." "Then I'll go to the creek bed." Colt shook his head. "Or you could stay in the barn, stay quiet, and trust that most riders pass through without stopping. Running makes you visible. Stillness makes you invisible." She considered this, her jaw working as she weighed the logic against her instincts. Finally, she nodded. "I'll stay, but if I see dust on the horizon—" "You do what you need to do." He turned toward the tool shed. "Let me check for that seal first. Maybe we can avoid town altogether." The tool shed was a small structure he'd built in his second year on the ranch, little more than 4 walls and a roof to keep his equipment dry. Inside, organized with the same precision as everything else in his life, tools hung on pegs and parts filled carefully labeled boxes. Colt found the seal in less than a minute, still in its original wrapping. "Lucky," Tala said from the doorway. "Prepared," he corrected. "Out here, luck is just preparation meeting opportunity." "My people have a similar saying." She paused. "Had a similar saying?" Colt wanted to ask more about her people, about what she'd left behind and why, but he recognized the closed expression on her face, the same wall he put up when people got too close to subjects he didn't want to discuss. Instead, he handed her the seal and a wrench. "Think you can handle the replacement while I start on morning feeding?" Her eyebrows rose slightly. "You trust me with your water supply?" "You found the problem. Seems fair you get to fix it." For a moment, something softened in her expression. Gratitude, maybe, or surprise at being trusted. Then she took the tools and headed back to the pump without another word. Colt watched her go, then turned his attention to the horses. The bay mare nickered as he approached her stall, nosing his shoulder in greeting. He stroked her neck absently, his mind elsewhere. 2 days left. Less than 2 days, really. Tomorrow evening, Tala would leave, and he'd return to the life he'd built on solitude and routine. The thought sat wrong in his chest. He was hauling the second bucket of grain when he heard Tala swear, a sharp, vicious sound in a language he didn't recognize. He dropped the bucket and ran, half expecting to find her injured or under attack. Instead, he found her wrestling with the pump handle, her face flushed with effort and frustration. "The seal's in," she said through gritted teeth, "but the whole assembly is seized, probably hasn't been properly maintained in—" She stopped, shooting him a look. "When's the last time you oiled this?" "Oil it?" "The moving parts. They need lubrication or they corrode." She released the handle with obvious disgust. "How have you been getting water?" "The pump works fine." "It works poorly," she corrected, "and soon it won't work at all." She wiped her hands on her pants. "Do you have any grease? Actual grease, not just oil." 20 minutes later, they dismantled half the pump mechanism and spread the parts across an old tarp. Tala worked with focused intensity, cleaning each piece before applying fresh grease from the can Colt had retrieved from the tool shed. Her movements were precise, almost ritualistic, and he found himself fascinated by the concentration on her face. "Who taught you this?" he asked, handing her a rag. "My father." The words came out flat, emotionless. He said every warrior should know how to repair what they depend on: water, weapons, shelter, the basics of survival. Smart man. He was. Past tense, delivered with such finality that Colt didn't press further. They worked side by side in comfortable silence, Tala directing and Colt assisting. The sun climbed higher, burning off the morning coolness and replacing it with the dry heat that characterized frontier afternoons. By the time they reassembled the pump, both were sweating and dusty. Tala gave the handle an experimental push. It moved smoothly with none of the grinding resistance from before. Water gushed from the spout in a clean, strong stream. She allowed herself a small smile of satisfaction. "There, now it works fine." "Better than fine," Colt admitted. "Best it's worked in years." "Because I maintained it properly." She wiped sweat from her forehead, leaving a smudge of grease across her temple. "You can't just use things without caring for them. Everything needs attention, or it breaks down." There was something in the way she said it, an edge of bitterness, or maybe grief, that suggested she wasn't just talking about water pumps. Colt decided not to pursue it. "Come on," he said instead. "Let's get cleaned up, then I'll make lunch." "I can cook," she offered. "Can you?" "I can make things edible." Her mouth quirked. "I won't promise more than that." Lunch turned out to be better than edible. She'd taken the dried beans he'd been planning to reheat and somehow transformed them into something that actually had flavor, using herbs from the small garden plot he'd neglected for the past month. They ate on the porch, taking advantage of the shade and the slight breeze that had picked up from the east. "This is good," Colt said, surprised. "Don't sound so shocked." But there was amusement in her voice. "I told you, I learned fast, including from watching you cook last night. You have the skills, you just don't use them fully. Cooking for one doesn't require much effort. Maybe that's the problem." She set down her bowl. "When you only do things for yourself, there's no reason to do them well. No one to impress, no one to care if you try or don't." The observation cut closer than she probably intended. Colt had spent 15 years doing exactly that. The bare minimum required for survival, nothing more. No decoration, no comfort, no beauty. Just function and routine in the slow, steady march of empty days. "Is that how it was for you?" he asked. "Before you left? Always trying to impress others?" "Not impress. Please." Her expression darkened. "Everything I did, everything I was supposed to become. It was all about making others happy. Making them feel safe, or powerful, or righteous." She spat the last word like a curse. "I was never allowed to just exist for myself. And now? Now I exist for myself. Alone." She stood abruptly, collecting the bowls. "Which is exactly how I want it." But Colt heard the lie in her voice, saw it in the tension of her shoulders. She didn't want to be alone any more than he truly wanted the isolation he'd chosen. They were both hiding, both pretending that solitude was preference rather than prison. The afternoon stretched long and hot. They worked on smaller tasks, mending tack, organizing the tool shed properly. checking the chicken coop for the eggs Colt had been ignoring for days. Mundane work, the kind that filled time without requiring much thought. But there was an ease to it, a rhythm they'd fallen into without discussion. Tala proved competent at every task he set her to, approaching each one with the same focused intensity she'd shown with the pump. She didn't just complete jobs, she improved them, finding inefficiencies and fixing them almost instinctively. By late afternoon, his tack room was better organized than it had been in years, and she'd identified 3 fence posts that would need replacing before winter. "You're wasted as a fugitive," Colt observed, watching her mark the damaged posts with a piece of chalk. "You'd make an excellent ranch hand." Ranch hand. She tested the words, as if trying on a new identity. "Is that what I am for these 3 days?" "If you want to be." She looked at him then, really looked at him, her dark eyes searching his face for something he couldn't name. "What happens after 3 days, Colt?" "You leave." We agreed. "And if I don't want to leave?" The question hung between them, heavy with implications neither seemed ready to examine. Colt felt his carefully constructed walls trembling, the foundation he'd built his entire life on suddenly feeling less solid than it had that morning. "It's not about what you want," he said finally, more harshly than he intended. "Someone's hunting you. Staying here puts us both at risk." "I know." She turned back to the fence post, her voice gone flat again. "I know. 3 days. Then I run again. Then I run." That evening, Colt made dinner while Tala disappeared into the barn to change the dressing on her wound. When she emerged moving easier than she had that morning, he had venison steaks sizzling in a pan and potatoes roasting in the oven. A real meal, the kind he hadn't bothered making in months. She noticed immediately. "Special occasion?" "Just tired of beans." Liar. But she smiled as she said it, settling into her now customary chair. "You're trying." "Maybe I am." They ate while the sun set, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple that seemed almost too beautiful for the harsh landscape. Tala watched the display through the kitchen window, her expression distant. "We don't have sunsets like this," she said quietly, "where I'm from. Too many trees, too much moisture in the air. Everything's green and close and suffocating." She paused. "Here, you can see forever. It's freeing. It's lonely." Sometimes lonely and free are the same thing. Colt wanted to argue, to point out that freedom without connection was just another form of prison, but he'd spent 15 years telling himself the same lie she was telling now. Who was he to call her out on it? After dinner, they sat on the porch, as had become their habit, sharing the silence and the cooling evening air. A coyote called from somewhere to the south, its cry lonely and defiant. Tala's head turned toward the sound, her body tensing slightly. "They won't come near the ranch," Colt said, "not with the horses and the lights." "I know, it's just—" She trailed off, then started again. "Where I come from, we have similar sounds, warnings usually, signals that danger is approaching." "Is danger approaching now?" "I don't know." She pulled her knees up, wrapping her arms around them despite the lingering heat. "I felt watch since yesterday afternoon, but I can't tell if it's real or just paranoia." Colt's hand moved instinctively toward where his rifle leaned against the wall. "You should have said something." "And what would you have done? We can't see anything in the dark, and if someone is out there, showing fear would only encourage them." She was right, but it didn't ease the tension suddenly coiling in his gut. He scanned the darkness beyond the porch, looking for any sign of movement, any shadow that didn't belong. But the night revealed nothing except stars and the dim shapes of familiar landmarks. "Go inside," he said quietly. "Lock the door. I'll check the perimeter." "Colt, please." He stood, already reaching for the rifle. "If you're right, I need to know. If you're wrong, we'll both sleep better." She studied him for a long moment, then nodded and disappeared into the house. He heard the lock slide home with a solid click. Good. At least she'd be safe while he played the fool in the dark. Colt moved away from the house with practiced silence, letting his eyes adjust to the starlight. The ranch spread before him in shades of gray and black, every shadow potentially hiding a threat. He checked the barn first. The horses were calm, not displaying any of the nervousness they'd show if a stranger approached. The chickens had settled for the night, undisturbed. Next, he circled the house at a distance, looking for tracks or signs of intrusion. The ground was hard enough that it wouldn't hold prints well, but he'd know his own property, would recognize if something was out of place. He found nothing except the trail of his own boots from earlier in the day. But as he completed his circuit and stood near the eastern fence line, staring out at the vast darkness beyond his land, Colt couldn't shake the feeling that Tala was right. Something had changed in the air, some indefinable quality that spoke of presence where there should be absence. He stayed there for nearly an hour, watching and waiting. The coyote called again, closer this time. An owl swept past on silent wings, hunting. The normal sounds of a frontier night, nothing unusual. Finally, he returned to the house and knocked softly on the door. "It's me." The lock clicked open. Tala stood in the doorway, still fully dressed, a kitchen knife in her hand. She'd been prepared to fight if the wrong person came to that door. "Anything?" she asked. "No. You're either paranoid or whoever's watching is very good." "I'm not paranoid." She set down the knife. "But maybe you're right about them being good." Colt stepped inside, locking the door behind him. "You should stay in the house tonight. Take my bed. I'll sleep out here on the floor." "I'm not taking your bed." "It's not a negotiation." He was already pulling blankets from the chest in the corner. "If something happens, I want you behind a locked door with a solid wall at your back, not in a barn with 3 open sides." "And you?" "I'm a light sleeper. And I'll have the rifle." She looked like she wanted to argue, but exhaustion won out. The past 2 days of hard work on top of her injuries had taken their toll. She nodded reluctantly and headed for the bedroom. At the door, she paused and looked back. "Colt, thank you for believing me." "Get some sleep, Tala." After she'd closed the bedroom door, Colt made himself as comfortable as possible on the hard floor, the rifle within easy reach. Through the window, he could see a slice of the eastern sky, already showing the first hint of the moon rising. One more full day, then she'd leave and his life would return to normal. The thought should have brought relief. Instead, it felt like loss. He was still staring at the ceiling, listening to the small sounds of Tala settling in the next room, when he finally acknowledged the truth he'd been avoiding. He didn't want her to leave. For the first time in 15 years, his house felt like more than just shelter. It felt like a home. And that terrified him more than any potential threat lurking in the darkness. Sleep came eventually, fitful and full of half-remembered dreams. He woke twice to check the windows, saw nothing but darkness and stars, and forced himself back to rest. The third time he woke, gray dawn light was filtering through the windows, and the smell of coffee filled the house. Tala was in the kitchen, moving with quiet efficiency. She'd found the coffee he kept in the cupboard and figured out his temperamental stove. When she noticed him stirring, she poured a second cup without asking. "Nothing happened," she said, handing him the coffee. "I checked the windows every hour. No movement, no sounds. Maybe it was nothing. Maybe." But she didn't sound convinced. They drank their coffee in silence as the sun rose, painting the world in shades of gold. Outside, the ranch was waking to another day. Birds calling, horses stirring, the land itself seeming to stretch and settle into morning routine. One more day, Colt thought. Then she'd be gone, and he'd be left with nothing but the memory of what it felt like to not be alone. But even as he thought it, he knew it was already too late. Whether Tala left tomorrow or next week or next month, she'd already changed something fundamental in him. She'd reminded him what it felt like to care about someone other than himself. And once you remembered that feeling, you could never fully forget it again. "What should we work on today?" Tala asked, breaking into his thoughts. Colt set down his coffee cup, forcing himself to focus on the practical. "The south pasture fence needs checking. It's a longer walk, several miles out and back." "I can handle it." "I know you can." He met her eyes. "Question is, should you? If we're both away from the ranch for hours and someone does come looking, they'll find an empty house," she shrugged. "Same as if I were here alone, at least this way, we're together." Together. Such a simple word, but it hit him like a physical blow. When had he started thinking of them as a we? When had her presence become something he factored into his plans instead of working around? "Together, then," he heard himself say, "but we bring the rifle, and we stay alert." "Always," she agreed. They set out an hour later, after a quick breakfast and the morning feeding. The walk to the south pasture took them through terrain Colt knew as intimately as his own heartbeat, past the creek bed where cottonwoods grew in defiance of the dry climate, across a stretch of open grassland where he sometimes spotted antelope, through a small canyon whose red rock walls trapped the morning coolness. Tala walked beside him with increasing ease, her ankle finally healing properly. She tied her hair back again, and in the morning light, Colt could see the scar along her jaw more clearly. It was old, well-healed, the kind of mark that came from a blade rather than an accident. "How'd you get that?" he asked, nodding toward it. Her hand moved unconsciously to touch the scar. "A lesson in obedience I refused to learn." "Someone cut you for disobeying?" "Someone tried to mark me, to show ownership." Her voice went hard. "I made sure they never tried again." "What happened to them?" "They lived. I'm not a killer, Colt." She glanced at him. "Not unless I have no choice." "And the person who gave you that wound on your ribs? That one didn't live." She said it flatly, without pride or shame. "They gave me a choice between their life and mine. I chose mine." They walked in silence for several minutes, the only sound their boots on the hard ground and the occasional call of a hawk overhead. Colt found himself reassessing everything he thought he knew about Tala. She wasn't just running from control. She'd fought her way free, had killed to claim her own life. And somehow, knowing that didn't frighten him. It made him respect her more. The south fence line, when they reached it, was in worse shape than he'd remembered. Several posts had rotted completely through at the base, and the wire sagged dangerously in multiple sections. A full day's work, at least. Maybe two. "We should have brought more supplies," Tala observed, surveying the damage. "We'll mark what needs replacing and come back tomorrow with—" Colt stopped. Tomorrow she'd be leaving. There would be no we to come back. Tala heard it too, the unspoken truth hanging between them. She turned to face him, her expression carefully neutral. "Or I could stay, one more day. Help you finish this properly." That wasn't the agreement. Agreements can change. She met his eyes. "Can't they?" Before Colt could answer, before he could examine why his heart had leapt at the suggestion, a sound carried across the open ground. Distant but distinct. Hoofbeats. Someone was approaching the ranch from the east. They looked at each other, all previous conversation forgotten. Tala's hand moved to her side, where a knife was sheathed beneath her shirt. Colt brought the rifle up, not aiming, but ready. "Could be anyone," he said quietly. "Travelers asking for water. Neighbors checking in." "You don't have neighbors close enough to check in." Tala's voice had gone cold, controlled. "And travelers use the main road." She was right. In 15 years, he'd had maybe a dozen unexpected visitors, and none approaching directly from the east. That direction led only to open country and eventually the territories beyond. "We need to get back," Colt said. "Now." They ran. The miles back to the ranch had never felt longer. Colt set a punishing pace, his boots hammering the hard ground in rhythm with his racing heart. Tala kept up without complaint, her breathing controlled despite the speed, but he could see the tension in every line of her body. She ran like someone who'd done this before, fleeing toward uncertain safety with danger at her back. They crested the last rise before the ranch came into view, and both stopped simultaneously. Below them, in the yard between the house and barn, a lone rider sat motionless on a gray horse. Even from a distance, Colt could see the man's posture. Relaxed, confident, the bearing of someone who expected no resistance. "Do you know him?" Colt asked, keeping his voice low even though they were too far away to be heard. Tala's face had gone pale beneath its bronze tone, her hands clenched into fists at her sides. "I know what he is." "That's not an answer." "He's a tracker, one of the best." She swallowed hard. "They sent him because everyone else failed." Colt studied the rider more carefully. The man wore dark clothes suited for hard travel, and even at this distance he could see the rifle strapped to the saddle and what looked like a revolver at the hip. But it was the way he sat, patient, almost meditative, that sent warning bells through Colt's mind. This wasn't some hired gun looking for quick violence. This was someone who approached hunting as a craft. "What does he want?" Colt asked. "Me. To bring me back. Or to make sure I never come back at all." Her voice had gone flat, emotionless, the same tone she'd used when talking about killing the person who'd wounded her. Those are the only two options they gave him. There's a third option. What's that? He leaves empty-handed. Colt checked the rifle, making sure it was loaded and ready. And alive if he's smart. Tala grabbed his arm, her grip surprisingly strong. Colt, no. You don't understand what you're dealing with. These people, my people, they don't accept defiance. If you stand against him, you become a target too. I became a target the moment I stitched that wound. He met her eyes. Maybe even before that. The moment I decided to let you in instead of turning you away. You're a fool. Probably. He started down the slope toward the ranch. But I'm a fool with a rifle and legal claim to this land. Out here, that counts for something. The rider's head turned as they approached, tracking their movement with the focused attention of a predator. Colt kept the rifle pointed downward but ready, every muscle coiled for action. Beside him, Tala had gone very still, her right hand hovering near the knife at her side. They stopped 20 feet from the mounted man, close enough to speak without shouting, but far enough to react if things went wrong. Colt got his first clear look at the tracker's face, lean and weathered, with eyes the color of winter ice and a mouth set in a thin line that might have been amusement or contempt. "This is private property," Colt said, his voice carrying the authority of someone used to being obeyed. "State your business or move along." The rider's gaze flicked to him briefly before returning to Tala. When he spoke, his voice was surprisingly soft, almost gentle. "You know why I'm here." Tala said nothing, but her jaw tightened. "I've been tracking you for 8 days, the man continued, still in that same quiet tone. "Through 3 territories and across 2 rivers. You're good at hiding, I'll give you that. Better than most." He paused. "But not good enough." "She's under my protection," Colt said, raising the rifle slightly. Not aiming, not yet, but making his position clear. "Whatever business you think you have with her, it ends here." Now the rider did look at him, really looked at him, and Colt felt the weight of that cold assessment. The man was measuring him, calculating odds, determining if he was a genuine threat or just a complication to be managed. "You're Colt Maddox," the tracker said. It wasn't a question. "Homesteader, 15 years on this land, no family, no close ties to town. You served in the territorial militia during the border conflicts, earned a reputation for being difficult to kill." He tilted his head slightly. "But that was a long time ago. You're not that man anymore." The casual recitation of his history sent ice through Colt's veins. This man had done his research, had learned enough about Colt to make informed decisions about how to handle him. That level of preparation spoke to patience and intelligence, the most dangerous combination in an opponent. "I'm man enough to defend what's mine," Colt said evenly. "Is she yours?" The tracker's gaze shifted back to Tala. "Strange. She doesn't look like property, and I was under the impression she belonged to someone else." "I belong to myself," Tala said, her voice vibrating with barely controlled fury. "I made that clear when I left. When I killed the last man who tried to claim otherwise." "Ah, yes. Cavan." The tracker's expression didn't change. "That was unfortunate. He was a good soldier, loyal. He was a monster." "Perhaps." The man shifted slightly in his saddle, and Colt's finger moved closer to the trigger. But the tracker was only adjusting his weight, making no move toward his weapons. "But his character doesn't change your obligations. You were promised. Contracts were made. Honor demands." "Honor?" Tala laughed, the sound bitter and sharp. "You want to talk to me about honor? After what they planned? After what they would have forced me to become?" "I don't make judgments about what's right or wrong," the tracker said. "I just bring back what's lost. Or ensure it stays lost permanently." He let that hang in the air for a moment. "The choice is yours." Colt saw Tala's hand move toward her knife and stepped forward, placing himself between her and the mounted man. "The only choice here is yours, friend. You can turn that horse around and ride back the way you came. Tell whoever sent you that you couldn't find her. Tell them she died crossing the river, or got taken by bandits, or just vanished into the frontier. I don't care what story you sell them. And if I refuse, then you'll find out if I'm still the man I used to be." Colt raised the rifle, not quite aiming at the tracker, but close enough that the threat was unmistakable. "And I promise you that's not a test you want to run." The silence stretched between them, thick with tension. The tracker's horse shifted, sensing its rider's calculation. Somewhere in the distance, a crow called out, its harsh cry breaking the stillness. Finally, the tracker nodded slowly. "You're serious? As a grave? Then you're either very brave or very stupid." The man gathered his reins but didn't move yet. "Do you know what you're protecting her from? What she was meant to do?" "Don't care." "You should." The tracker's ice-blue eyes fixed on Colt with uncomfortable intensity. She was promised to the council's war chief, a political marriage meant to bind her clan to the greater alliance. Refusing didn't just break a contract, it threatened the entire peace structure we've built over the last decade. Sounds like their problem, not mine. It becomes your problem when the council decides you're harboring stolen property. The tracker's voice remained calm, almost conversational. They'll send others, more of them, and they won't be as reasonable as I'm being. Let them come. Colt's hands were steady on the rifle, his voice harder than steel. This is my land. Out here, I'm the law, and I say she stays if she wants to stay. The tracker studied him for another long moment, then turned his attention back to Tala. Is this what you want? To hide behind another man? To let him fight battles that aren't his? I'm not hiding, Tala said, stepping out from behind Colt. And I'll fight my own battles, but I won't go back. Not to them. Not ever. Then you condemn him too. The tracker gestured toward Colt. You understand that? Whatever happens next, his blood is on your hands as much as Cavan's was. Something flickered across Tala's face. Doubt, maybe, or fear. But her voice stayed firm. He made his choice, same as I made mine. The tracker nodded as if this confirmed something he'd already suspected. He straightened in his saddle, and for a heartbeat, Colt thought he was reaching for his weapon. But instead, the man simply gathered his reins and turned his horse toward the east. I'll tell the council I couldn't find you, he said over his shoulder. That the trail went cold at the river. But they won't believe me, not really. They'll send others, and those others might not be willing to leave peacefully. He paused. You've got maybe 2 weeks, maybe less. Use them wisely. Wait, Colt called out. The tracker stopped but didn't turn around. Who are you? What's your name? Does it matter? If you're going to lie for her, risk your own reputation. Yeah, it matters. I want to know who just gave us a chance. The tracker was silent for a moment, then spoke without looking back. Riker. My name is Riker, and I'm not doing this for her. He did turn then, meeting Colt's eyes one last time. I'm doing it because I'm tired of hunting people who just want to be free. There's no honor in it, no matter what the council says. Then he was riding away, his gray horse carrying him back toward the eastern horizon at an easy lope. Colt kept the rifle raised until the rider was nothing but a distant speck, then finally lowered it with a long exhale he hadn't realized he was holding. He could be circling back, Tala said quietly, waiting for us to let our guard down. Could be. Colt turned to look at her. But I don't think so. That was a man at the end of his rope, doing one last decent thing before he breaks entirely. You trust him? I trust that he was telling the truth about one thing. We've got maybe 2 weeks before others come, and they won't be as willing to walk away. He started toward the house. Come on, we need to talk. Inside, Colt set the rifle by the door and moved to the kitchen, pouring 2 glasses of water from the pump Tala had repaired. His hands were steadier than he expected, but his mind was racing, calculating options and outcomes with the tactical precision he hadn't used in years. Tala took the offered water but didn't drink, just held it between her hands like she was trying to warm them despite the afternoon heat. You shouldn't have done that. Done what? Defended you? Made yourself a target. She set down the glass with enough force that water slopped over the rim. You don't understand what you've just started. These people, the council, the clans, they don't forgive. They don't forget. You're marked now, same as me. Then, I guess we're both marked. Colt leaned against the counter, crossing his arms. Seems like a good reason to work together instead of you running off alone. This isn't a joke, Colt. Do I look like I'm joking? He pushed away from the counter, moving closer. You think I didn't know what I was risking out there? The moment that tracker described my history, I knew he'd researched me, knew I'd be a factor in whatever happened next, and I still chose to stand between you and him. Why? The question came out raw, almost desperate. Why would you risk everything for someone you barely know? Colt opened his mouth to answer, then closed it again. Why had he done it? The practical answer was simple. He'd made a commitment to protect her, and he didn't break his word. But there was more to it than that, layers he wasn't ready to examine too closely. Because you reminded me of something, he finally said. Something I'd forgotten I could be. What's that? Someone who gives a damn. He met her eyes. I've spent 15 years not caring about anything beyond my fence line. Not getting involved. Not taking sides. Just existing from one day to the next like a ghost haunting his own life. He paused. Then you showed up, bleeding and defiant, and something in me woke up. Something I thought I'd buried for good. Tala stared at him, her dark eyes searching his face. You're a fool, she said again, but this time there was no heat in it, just a kind of wondering sadness. So you keep saying. He moved to the window, looking out at the yard where the tracker had sat just minutes ago. But I'd rather be a fool who tried than a coward who hid. And when they come back? When it's not one reasonable tracker but a dozen armed men who won't accept anything but my return or my death? Then we'll deal with it. He turned to face her. Together. You keep saying that word. Together. She shook her head. I've been alone for so long, I'm not sure I remember what it means. Neither do I, Colt admitted. But maybe we can figure it out before those 2 weeks are up. The afternoon sun slanted through the window, painting everything in shades of amber. Outside, the ranch stood quiet and peaceful, giving no hint of the storm that was building on the horizon. But both of them could feel it, the weight of approaching violence, the certainty that what had just happened was only the beginning. Tala moved to stand beside him at the window, close enough that their shoulders almost touched. I could still leave, she said quietly. Tonight, before they have time to organize, I could disappear into the territories, keep running until they give up, or I die trying. You could, Colt agreed. Is that what you want? She was silent for a long time, staring out at the land that had become familiar over the past 3 days. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. No, I'm tired of running, tired of always looking over my shoulder, never staying anywhere long enough to matter. I want... She stopped, seeming to struggle with the words. I want what you have, a place that belongs to me, roots. Roots can be dangerous. They tie you down, make you vulnerable. Maybe. She turned to look at him. But they also give you something worth fighting for. And I'm so tired of fighting just to survive. I want to fight for something more. Colt understood that desire better than he could express. For 15 years, he'd survived without really living, going through the motions without purpose beyond the next sunrise. But these past 3 days, working beside Tala, sharing meals and conversation, and the simple satisfaction of completed tasks, it had awakened something in him he'd thought permanently dead. Hope. The most dangerous feeling of all. Then you'll stay, he said. It wasn't a question. I'll stay. Tala squared her shoulders, and he saw the moment she made the decision final, saw it settle into her bones with the weight of chosen commitment. Not because I'm hiding, not because I'm afraid to keep running, but because I choose this place. And you. The words hung between them, heavy with implication. Colt felt something shift in his chest, like a door he'd bolted shut, suddenly creaking open after years of disuse. We should prepare, he said, forcing himself to focus on the practical. 2 weeks isn't much time. We need to fortify the house, lay in extra supplies, set up warning systems. Colt. Tala's hand on his arm stopped the flow of planning. Before we do any of that, I need to tell you what you're really protecting, what I really am. He waited, giving her space to speak. My people, the clans, we're not like the settlers here. We have different customs, different laws, and women in our society have roles we're expected to fulfill without question. We're matched to men based on political needs, expected to produce children who'll strengthen alliances. She swallowed hard. We're tools. Valuable maybe, but still just tools to be used. And you refuse to be used. I refused to marry the war chief, refused to smile and accept and pretend I was grateful for the honor. Her voice grew stronger. I told them I'd rather die free than live as property. So they sent Cavan to bring me back, to teach me obedience. He tried to force me, thought he could break my will through violence. She pulled aside her shirt collar, revealing more scars Colt hadn't seen before. He got close, closer than anyone else had. But in the end, I was faster with a knife than he expected, and I didn't hesitate. Good, Colt said simply. She blinked, surprised. Good? I killed a man. One of my own people. A man who tried to rape you, from what you're describing. A man who thought he had the right to your body because some council said so. Colt's jaw tightened. Yeah, good. The world's better without him in it. Something in Tala's expression crumbled, years of defensive walls suddenly showing cracks. Everyone else said I was wrong, that I should have submitted, that killing him was dishonorable. Everyone else was wrong. He spoke with absolute certainty. You had every right to defend yourself, every right to choose your own path, and anyone who says different can answer to me. She let out a shaky breath, and Colt realized she was trembling, not from fear but from relief. The release of carrying a burden alone for too long. Acting on instinct, he pulled her into his arms, and after a moment's hesitation, she leaned into him, her forehead pressed against his shoulder. They stood like that for a long time, two damaged people finding unexpected comfort in each other's presence. Outside, the sun continued its slow descent toward the horizon. Inside, something fundamental had changed between them, a shift from allies of convenience to something deeper, more permanent. Finally, Tala pulled back, swiping at her eyes with the back of her hand. I'm not usually like this. Weak. That wasn't weak, Colt said. That was human. She managed a small smile. Maybe I'd forgotten how to be human. Been a weapon for so long, being a person again feels strange. You'll remember. He moved to the cupboard, pulling out the maps he kept there. But first we work. If we're going to survive what's coming, we need to be smart about it. They spread the maps across the kitchen table, detailed surveys of his land and the surrounding territory that Colt had painstakingly created over the years. He pointed to key landmarks as he spoke. The ranch is here, roughly central to my property. East is open ground for about 3 miles before you hit the river. That's where they'll come from, most likely. South is the creek bed and canyon, good defensive position if we need to fall back. West is more open range, but there's a rock formation about 2 miles out that could work as a secondary position. North is where the fence line meets the road. Tala studied the maps with tactical precision, her earlier emotion locked away behind a focused mask. How many approaches are there? 4 main ones, but the eastern route is the most obvious. Anyone coming from your territory would naturally approach from that direction. Then we assume they'll use it. She traced the line with her finger. How far can we see from the house? Maybe a mile on clear days, less if there's dust or weather. Not enough warning time. She tapped the map thoughtfully. We need observation posts, places we can watch from that give us advance notice of anyone approaching. The old windmill platform on the eastern boundary, Colt suggested. I haven't used it in years, but the structure's still sound, clear sight lines in every direction. Good. What about supplies? Food? Water? Ammunition? They spent the next hour going through inventory, making lists of what they had and what they'd need. Colt was surprised by how thoroughly Tala approached the planning. She thought like a soldier, anticipating problems before they arose and developing contingencies for every scenario. You said you were trained as a warrior, he observed. How much training? 10 years. She didn't look up from the list she was writing. Starting at age 12. Hand-to-hand combat, weapons proficiency, tactical planning, survival skills. We were supposed to be the elite guards for the council, the ones who protected our people from external threats. Her mouth twisted. Instead, they used us to enforce internal control, to intimidate anyone who questioned their authority. Is that why you left? Because you disagreed with how they used you? That was part of it. She set down the pencil. But mostly I left because I finally understood what they were doing. They weren't training us to be warriors. They were training us to be weapons they could point at anyone who threatened their power. And I realized that if I stayed, I'd eventually be used to hurt innocent people, to become the thing I'd been taught to fight against. Colt thought about his own time in the militia, about the orders he'd followed and the ones he'd refused, about the moment he'd realized that following orders didn't absolve him of responsibility for his actions. It seemed he and Tala had more in common than just solitary living. "We should eat," he said, changing the subject before it got too heavy. "Then we'll start on the fortifications tomorrow. Work from first light until we can't see anymore. 2 weeks isn't enough time to prepare properly. Then we'll do the best we can with what we have." He started pulling ingredients for dinner. "Besides, we've got one advantage they don't." "What's that?" "We're fighting for something that matters. They're just following orders." He met her eyes. That kind of motivation counts for a lot in a fight. Dinner was a quiet affair, both of them lost in their own thoughts about what was coming. But afterward, as they cleaned up together, Tala broke the silence. "Colt, if this goes badly, if they overwhelm us, I want you to promise me something." "What?" "That you'll let me surrender, that you won't die trying to protect me from consequences I earned." He was shaking his head before she finished. "Not happening." "Colt, I said no." He set down the dish he was drying. "We're in this together now. That means we win together or we lose together. I'm not abandoning you to save my own skin. That's not what I'm asking. I'm asking you to survive. To not throw your life away for what? For someone I care about? For a principle I believe in?" He moved closer, his voice intense. "Tala, I've spent 15 years surviving. Just surviving. Nothing more. For the first time since I came to this ranch, I've got something worth living for. And I'll be damned if I'm going to give that up without a fight." She stared at him, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "You barely know me." "I know enough." He reached out, cupping her face gently. "I know you're brave and stubborn and talented. I know you'd rather die free than live in chains. I know you fix things instead of just using them, and you care about doing work properly even when no one's watching. That's enough." "Colt." She leaned into his touch, her eyes closing. "What are we doing?" "I don't know," he admitted. "But whatever it is, it feels right." She opened her eyes, and in them he saw the same uncertain hope he felt. Slowly, carefully, giving her every chance to pull away, he leaned down and kissed her. It was gentle, tentative, a question more than a demand. Tala answered by pulling him closer, her hands fisting in his shirt. The kiss deepened, 15 years of loneliness and days of growing connection pouring into that moment. When they finally broke apart, both were breathing hard. "We should get some rest," Colt said, though he made no move to step away. "Tomorrow's going to be a long day. All the days from now on will be long." But Tala smiled as she said it. "At least we won't face them alone." That night, Tala didn't sleep in the barn. She took Colt's bed as before, but this time he didn't sleep on the floor in the main room. Instead, by unspoken agreement, they lay together on top of the covers, fully clothed, her head resting on his shoulder and his arm around her. It was innocent but intimate, a shared warmth that had nothing to do with desire and everything to do with the human need for connection. "Tell me about the ranch," Tala murmured in the darkness. "Why you chose this place." Colt was quiet for a moment, organizing thoughts he'd never spoken aloud. "After the militia, I couldn't be around people anymore. Couldn't stand the noise, the expectations, the constant reminders of what I'd done and who I'd failed to save. I rode west until I found land that was cheap because nobody else wanted it, too far from town, too harsh, too lonely. And you thought lonely was good. I thought lonely was safe." He stared at the ceiling, barely visible in the starlight filtering through the window. "If I didn't care about anyone, I couldn't lose anyone, couldn't fail anyone, couldn't carry the weight of their blood on my hands. What changed?" "You did." The answer came easier than he expected. "You showed up half dead and determined to survive, and you reminded me that sometimes the things worth having are worth the risk of losing them." Tala's arm tightened around him. "I'm scared, Colt. Not of them coming, not of fighting, but of this, of caring about someone again, of letting myself hope that something good might last." "Me too," he admitted, "but we're doing it anyway." "Yeah," she whispered. "We are." They fell asleep like that, wrapped around each other against the dark. And in the morning, when the sun rose on their 4th day together, they woke ready to begin the work of preparation, not just for the fight that was coming, but for the life they were choosing to build in whatever time they had left. Because some things were worth fighting for. And some people were worth standing beside, no matter what came riding over the eastern horizon. The days after Mira's visit stretched into a week of careful vigilance mixed with cautious hope. Tala found herself standing at the windmill platform each morning, scanning the eastern horizon not just for threats, but for answers she couldn't quite name. The confrontation had shaken something loose inside her, some fundamental question about whether survival was truly enough or if she wanted something more. Below, Colt worked the morning feeding with the same steady rhythm he'd maintained for 15 years, but now his movements carried a different quality. He looked up periodically toward where she stood watch, and each time their eyes met, something passed between them that needed no words. They'd crossed a line together when he'd stood against that tracker, and neither of them could pretend otherwise anymore. Anything? Riker's voice carried up from the base of the windmill, startling her from her thoughts. Tala looked down to find the tracker leaning against the ladder, his weathered face creased with something that might have been concern. In the days since his warning, he'd made himself scarce, camping somewhere beyond the southern fence line. But each morning he appeared to check on them, bringing fresh game or information gleaned from watching the distant roads. "Nothing yet," she called down. "But they're coming. I can feel it." Feelings don't count for much in combat planning. But Riker's expression suggested he shared her unease. "Mind if I come up?" She gestured assent, and he climbed with the easy grace of someone who'd spent a lifetime moving through difficult terrain. At the top, he settled beside her, both of them looking east toward the territories she'd fled. "You don't have to do this alone," he said after a moment. "The watching, I mean. I could take shifts, give you time to actually live instead of just surviving." "Why would you help us? You barely know me, and Colt's just some rancher you met once." "Because I'm tired of hunting people who just want to be free." Riker pulled a piece of grass, chewing it thoughtfully. "I've tracked dozens of runners over the years. Most of them were criminals, deserters, people who genuinely wronged others. But some were like you, just trying to escape a life they never chose. And every time I brought one back, I watched the light die in their eyes. Started to wonder if I was really serving justice or just enforcing control. So this is about your conscience. This is about doing something right for once." He met her eyes. "The Council's wrong, Tala. The way they use people, the way they treat freedom like something to be rationed out as reward rather than recognized as a fundamental right. I've known it for years. Just took meeting you to finally admit it." Tala studied him, seeing the truth in his weathered face. "If you help us, you'll be marked too. They'll come after you the same way they're coming after me." "Let them try." A hard smile crossed his features. "I know all their tactics, trained most of their current trackers myself, and unlike you, I don't have moral qualms about ambush tactics and dirty tricks." Despite the tension, Tala found herself smiling. "You're a dangerous man, Riker. So are you. And so is your rancher down there, even if he pretends otherwise." Riker stood, brushing off his pants. "I'm going to scout the eastern approaches, set up some early warning systems. If they come, we'll have at least an hour's notice. Maybe more." "Thank you." He paused at the top of the ladder. "Don't thank me yet. Wait until we've survived what's coming." After he descended, Tala remained at her post, watching the land wake to full morning. The ranch spread below her in a patchwork of corrals and pastures, the house standing solid at its center. It wasn't much by some standards, just a few buildings and some livestock on harsh frontier land, but it represented something she'd never had before: choice. The realization hit her with unexpected force. For the first time in her life, she was exactly where she wanted to be, with people she'd chosen to trust, not because orders demanded it, not because duty required it, but because her heart had led her here and she'd been brave enough to follow. "Tala," Colt's voice carried up from below. "Come eat. You've been up there since before dawn." She climbed down to find him waiting with a plate of eggs and bread, still warm from the stove. They sat together on the porch steps, shoulders touching, eating in comfortable silence while the morning sun climbed higher. "Riker thinks we have maybe a week before they send the next group," Tala said between bites. "Maybe less." "Then we use the time we have." Colt set down his plate. "There's something I want to show you." He led her past the barn to a section of land she hadn't paid much attention to before, a flat area where the soil looked richer than the surrounding ground. Someone had cleared it once, prepared it for planting, then abandoned the effort. "I started this my second year here," Colt said, gesturing at the neglected plot. "Thought I'd grow vegetables, maybe some wheat, Be more self-sufficient. He paused. But I gave up after one season. Couldn't see the point of growing more than I needed when there was no one to share it with. Tala looked at the weed-choked earth, seeing not what it was, but what it could become. You could start again. We could start again. He turned to face her fully. That's what I'm trying to say, Tala. I know we agreed you'd leave after 3 days. I know the smart thing is probably for you to keep running, to disappear before the council sends overwhelming force, but I don't want you to go. Colt, let me finish. His hands found hers, gripping tight. I spent 15 years building a life based on not caring, not risking, not hoping for anything beyond the next sunrise. It was safe. It was empty. And I told myself that empty was better than the alternative, better than caring about people and losing them. And now? Now I've remembered what it feels like to want something more than just survival, to look forward to tomorrow because someone I care about will be there to share it. His voice roughened with emotion. Stay, Tala. Not because you're hiding, not because you have nowhere else to go, but because you choose this place. Because you choose me. The words hung between them, trembling with vulnerability and hope. Tala felt tears prick her eyes, not from sadness, but from the overwhelming relief of being truly seen and wanted for exactly who she was. I'm scared, she admitted. Not of them coming, not of fighting, but of this, of letting myself believe that something good might actually last. I'm scared too, Colt pulled her closer. Terrified, actually, but I'd rather be terrified and hoping than safe and empty. Tala looked past him at the neglected garden plot, then at the house they'd fortified together, then at the vast frontier stretching endlessly in all directions. And she realized that running had never really been about geography. She'd been running from connection, from vulnerability, from the terrifying possibility that she might matter to someone and they might matter to her. But standing here with Colt, feeling the solid warmth of his hands, and seeing the desperate hope in his eyes, she understood that some things were worth the risk of losing them. I'll stay, she said quietly. Not for 3 more days. Not until the next threat passes. But permanently. Because I choose this life. And I choose you. The kiss that followed was different from the one after the tracker's visit. Less desperate, more certain, carrying the weight of a promise rather than just desire. When they finally broke apart, both were smiling despite the tears on Tala's cheeks. So what do we do first, she asked. In this life we're choosing? Colt looked at the garden plot. We plant something that takes time to grow, that requires us to be here to tend it. An act of faith that will survive long enough to harvest. They spent the rest of the morning clearing the plot, pulling weeds and turning soil with tools Colt retrieved from storage. It was hard, honest work, the kind that made muscles ache and sweat pour but left the soul feeling clean. Tala found herself laughing at something Colt said, the sound startling her with its unfamiliarity. How long since she'd laughed freely, without fear or restraint? By afternoon, the plot was cleared and ready for planting. But before they could begin that next phase, Riker returned from his scouting mission, his expression grim. We need to talk, he said without preamble. I found tracks. Multiple riders, moving slow and careful, staying off the main approaches. They're being cautious this time, learning from the tracker's experience. Tala's hand moved instinctively toward her knife. How many? Can't tell for certain from tracks alone, but I'd estimate 6 to 8. Professional soldiers, not conscripts. Riker pulled out a rough map he'd drawn. They're circling, getting the lay of the land before committing to an approach. Smart tactics. How long before they move in? Colt asked. 2 days? Maybe 3. They're patient, willing to take their time to ensure success. Riker met Tala's eyes. This won't be like the tracker. This will be a coordinated assault designed to overwhelm through superior numbers and tactics. The joy of the morning evaporated, replaced by cold tactical awareness. Tala studied Riker's map, marking the likely approach routes and defensive positions in her mind. We need better fortifications, more ammunition, and a fallback position if the house becomes untenable. The creek bed, Colt suggested. It's defensible, has water, and multiple escape routes if needed. Good thinking, Riker added marks to his map. I can set false trails leading away from the ranch, make them think you've already fled. Buy us more time. They spent the afternoon in preparation, each of them falling into roles that felt almost natural despite the circumstances. Riker worked on deception and early warning systems. Colt reinforced defensive positions and distributed supplies. And Tala created tactical plans for various scenarios, her warrior training finally serving a purpose she could believe in. As evening approached, they gathered in the house to review their preparations. Maps covered the table, ammunition was stacked in strategic locations, and contingency plans had been discussed until everyone knew their roles by heart. "There's one more thing we should discuss," Riker said, his voice carefully neutral. "If this goes badly, if they capture you alive, Tala, the Council won't just kill you, they'll make an example. Public trial, public execution, designed to discourage anyone else from following your path." "I know," Tala said quietly. "I've known that from the beginning." "Which is why we don't let them take you alive," Colt said with absolute finality. "We win or we die fighting. Those are the only acceptable outcomes." Riker nodded slowly. "Agreed. But we should also prepare for the possibility of winning. What happens after? The Council won't stop with one failed assault. They'll keep coming, keep sending people, until the cost becomes prohibitive or they achieve their objective." "Then we make the cost prohibitive," Tala said. "We hurt them badly enough that continuing becomes politically untenable. Make them question whether one runaway is worth the resources they're expending." "That's a dangerous gamble," Riker warned. "If you miscalculate, if they see it as a challenge to their authority rather than a cost-benefit analysis, they'll escalate beyond anything we can handle." "Everything's a gamble now." Tala stood, moving to the window to look out at the land she'd chosen. "But I'm tired of making decisions based on fear, tired of running from what might happen instead of standing for what I believe in. If they want me badly enough to keep sending people, then we'll keep defeating them until they learn the lesson." "Which is?" Colt asked, coming to stand beside her. "That some people can't be controlled. That freedom isn't something they have the authority to grant or withhold. That I belong to myself, and any attempt to claim otherwise will be met with absolute resistance." She turned to face both men. "I know it's asking a lot. I know the smart thing might be to negotiate, to compromise, to find some middle ground. But I can't do that. I can't give them even a small victory, because small victories have a way of becoming precedents." Colt's hand found hers, squeezing gently. "Then we don't compromise. We stand our ground and dare them to try taking it." "You're both insane," Riker said, but he was smiling. "Brave and principled and completely insane, and I wouldn't want to be anywhere else." They shared a meal as the sun set, the conversation lighter than the circumstances warranted. They talked about what they'd plant in the garden, about expanding the ranch, about the life they'd build when, not if, but when, they survived what was coming. It was an act of defiance as much as faith, refusing to let fear dictate their dreams. That night, after Riker had departed for his watch position and the house was quiet, Tala and Colt lay together in the darkness. Not sleeping, just holding each other, memorizing the feel of being together in case it was the last chance they got. "Tell me again," Tala whispered. "About the life we'll build." And Colt told her, painting pictures with words of harvests and expansion, of neighbors and community, of children playing in the yard and growing old together, watching sunsets from this same porch. He told her about ordinary days filled with ordinary tasks, about the profound joy of choosing to stay in one place and build something that mattered. And Tala listened, committing every word to memory, letting herself believe, truly believe, that all of it was possible. That she could have a future beyond running, beyond fighting, beyond the constant calculation of survival versus surrender. "I love you," she said into the darkness, the words awkward and unfamiliar but true. "I don't think I've ever said that to anyone before. But I love you, Colt Maddox. And I'm grateful you were stubborn enough not to let me just run." "I love you too," he replied, his voice thick with emotion. "And I'm grateful you were brave enough to stay." They fell asleep wrapped around each other, two people who'd built their lives on isolation, finally understanding what it meant to be truly connected. And in the morning, when the sun rose on what might be their last day of peace, they woke ready to face whatever came with the certainty that some things, some people, were worth any cost to protect. The garden plot waited, cleared and ready for planting. The ranch stood solid and prepared for defense. And two people who'd thought themselves too damaged for hope discovered that sometimes the bravest thing you could do was choose to believe in tomorrow. Even when tomorrow promised violence and uncertainty, even when the smart choice might be to run, they chose to stay, to stand together, to fight for the life they wanted, rather than accept the life others tried to force on them. And in that choice, they found something more valuable than safety or certainty. They found purpose. They found home. They found each other. The frontier stretched endlessly around them, harsh and beautiful and indifferent to human struggle. But they faced it side by side, no longer alone, no longer running. Just two people choosing love over fear, hope over despair, and the terrifying possibility of a future together over the empty certainty of solitude. And when the council's soldiers came, as they inevitably would, they'd find not a frightened fugitive and an isolated rancher, but two people who discovered what they were willing to die for, and more importantly, what they were willing to live for. The days that followed blurred together in a rhythm of purposeful labor that transformed both the ranch and the people working it. Colt and Tala rose before dawn each morning, working until their muscles ached and their hands were raw, then pushing through the exhaustion to complete one more task, reinforce one more position, prepare one more contingency. The house became a fortress without losing its character as a home. They boarded the windows on the north and east sides, leaving narrow gaps for observation and rifle fire. Tala suggested reinforcing the doorframe with salvaged metal from an old plow, and together they hammered it into place until the door could withstand anything short of sustained battering. Inside, they reorganized everything for quick access. Ammunition stored in multiple locations, water buckets positioned throughout, medical supplies within reach of every room. "You're thinking like a soldier," Colt observed on the fifth day, watching Tala create firing positions that allowed coverage of all approaches. "I am a soldier," she replied, testing the sight line from the kitchen window. "I just never had something worth defending before." The old windmill platform became their primary observation post. They spent 2 full days rebuilding the ladder and reinforcing the platform itself, then equipped it with supplies for extended watches: water, dried food, a blanket for cold nights, and a mirror for signaling. From its height, they could see nearly 2 miles in every direction, giving them precious warning time if riders approached. But it wasn't just defensive preparations that filled their days. In the evenings, after the physical work was done, they sat together and planned for a different kind of future, one where they survived what was coming and built something lasting from the ashes of their separate pasts. "The south pasture could support twice the cattle we have now," Tala said one night, studying the maps by lamplight. "If we diverted some of the creek water for irrigation, we could grow better grazing grass." "We?" Colt asked, a smile playing at his lips. She glanced up, catching his expression. "Yes, we. Unless you're planning to do all this work alone after I leave?" "You're not leaving." "No," she agreed softly. "I'm not." They'd fallen into an easy intimacy over the past week, their connection deepening with each shared task and quiet conversation. Tala still took Colt's bed each night, and he still joined her there, but now they talked until sleep claimed them, about childhoods and dreams, about the people they'd lost and the mistakes they couldn't undo. They learned each other's stories in fragments and whispers, building understanding brick by brick. On the 8th day, Colt rode to town for supplies, taking precautions Tala had insisted on, varying his route, watching for followers, purchasing items from multiple merchants to avoid revealing their preparations. He returned with ammunition, medical supplies, and enough food to last a month if rationed carefully. "Anyone asking questions?" Tala asked as they unloaded the supplies. "The general store owner wanted to know if I was expecting trouble. I told him I'd seen signs of rustlers in the area." Colt carried a crate into the house. He believed it, or pretended to. "And if he mentions it to others? Then they'll think I'm just being cautious. Nothing suspicious about a rancher protecting his property." He set down the crate and pulled her close. "Stop worrying. We're as prepared as we can be." But Tala couldn't stop the worry that gnawed at her gut, the certainty that they were running out of time. Each morning when she climbed to the windmill platform for her watch, she expected to see riders on the eastern horizon. Each evening, when nothing appeared, the tension wound tighter rather than easing. On the 10th day, something changed. Tala was at the windmill platform during the afternoon watch when she caught the first glint of movement in the distance. She grabbed the spyglass they'd positioned there and focused on the eastern approach. 3 riders, still far enough away that details were impossible, but moving with purpose directly toward the ranch. She signaled Colt with the mirror, 3 quick flashes, their agreed code for multiple contacts. Then she descended the ladder faster than was safe, hitting the ground running. Colt met her halfway between the windmill and the house, already armed. 3 riders, eastern approach, maybe 5 miles out, she reported breathlessly. Moving steady, but not rushing. Could be them, could be travelers. We don't get 3 travelers at once out here. Colt's jaw was set. Get to the house. I'll watch from the porch until we know for certain. They took their positions, and the waiting began. Minutes stretched like hours as the riders drew closer, their features gradually resolving through the spyglass Colt now held. 2 men, 1 woman, all armed and dressed for hard travel. The woman rode in front, her posture suggesting leadership. "Do you recognize them?" Colt asked without lowering the glass. Tala had been watching from the window, her own breathing shallow. "The woman is Mira. She was my training partner before I left. The men I don't know, but they're wearing council colors on their sleeves. Are they here to talk or fight? With Mira? Could be either." Tala's hand rested on the rifle propped beside the window. She believed in the council's mission, but she also valued honor. "If they sent her, it's because they think she can convince me to return peacefully." The riders stopped at the property line, well outside rifle range. The woman raised one hand in what could have been a greeting or a signal. Then she urged her horse forward alone, leaving her companions behind. "She's coming in alone," Colt said. "That's either a gesture of good faith or a distraction while the others circle around." "Both, probably." Tala moved to stand beside him on the porch. Mira was always good at multitasking. The woman rode slowly, deliberately, giving them plenty of time to assess her. She was tall, almost as tall as Tala, with dark hair braided tightly and a face that might have been beautiful if it weren't set in such hard lines. She stopped 30 feet from the porch, her hands visible and empty. "Talavirek," she called out, her voice carrying clearly across the distance. "It's been a long time." "Not long enough, Mira." Tala stepped forward, putting herself between the rider and Colt. "You shouldn't have come. The council sent me because they thought you'd listen, because we were friends once." Mira's gaze shifted to Colt, assessing. "Is this the man who's been sheltering you?" "This is Colt Maddox," Tala said. "And this is his land. You're trespassing. We're here on council business that supersedes property rights." But Mira said it without heat, almost apologetically. "Tala, please, just listen to what I have to say. After that, if you still refuse, I'll leave and report that I couldn't find you." Tala exchanged a glance with Colt. He gave a slight nod. Her decision. She turned back to Mira. "Talk, but your friends stay where they are, and your hands stay visible." Agreed. Mira dismounted slowly, her movements careful and non-threatening. She approached the porch, but stopped at the bottom step, maintaining distance. "The council is willing to negotiate. They understand you had concerns about the marriage arrangement." "Concerns?" Tala's laugh was sharp. "I had concerns about being sold like livestock to a man who'd already demonstrated his brutality. That's not concerns, Mira. That's self-preservation. Kevin's dead. The war chief position is vacant." Mira held up a hand before Tala could interrupt. "They're willing to absolve you of the marriage contract. You can return to the clans without that obligation." "In exchange for what?" "Service to the council. 5 years as an elite guard, then freedom to choose your own path. No forced marriage, no political obligations. Just your skills in exchange for forgiveness." Mira's expression softened slightly. "It's a generous offer, Tala, more than anyone else would get after killing one of our own." Tala felt Colt tense beside her but kept her focus on Mira. "And if I refuse? Then you remain an outlaw, hunted, always looking over your shoulder. The council has authorized permanent pursuit. They'll never stop sending people after you. You'll never have peace." Mira paused. "Is that really the life you want? Running forever?" "I'm not running anymore," Tala said quietly. "I'm standing still. I found a place worth defending." Mira's eyes flicked to Colt again, and something like understanding crossed her face. "You care about him, the rancher. His name is Colt. And yes, I care about him. More than I care about appeasing a council that values control over freedom." "Tala, no." Tala's voice hardened. I'm done being a weapon for people who don't care about me. Done following orders that make me compromise who I am. I killed Kevin because he tried to take my choice away, and I'll kill anyone else who tries the same. Tell the council that. Tell them I choose this life, this place, this man, and if they can't accept that, then we'll settle it the hard way. Mira was silent for a long moment, her jaw working as if chewing something bitter. Finally, she shook her head. You always were stubborn. Even when we were training, you never knew when to bend. Bending is just slow breaking, Tala replied. I'd rather stand tall and break clean. Then I'm sorry. Mira turned back toward her horse. I tried. When they send the next group, it won't be negotiators. It'll be an execution squad. Let them come, Colt said, speaking for the first time. This is still my land, and I still decide who's welcome on it. Your council has no authority here. Mira paused with one hand on her saddle. You're brave, Mr. Maddox, but bravery won't stop a dozen trained warriors. They'll come at night from multiple directions with overwhelming force, and when it's over, this ranch will burn and both of you will be dead. She mounted smoothly. I'm saying this as someone who once cared about Tala. Take the deal. 5 years of service in exchange for both your lives. It's the best offer you'll get. We'll take our chances, Colt said. Mira looked at them both, Tala standing defiant with her hand near her weapon, Colt solid and unmovable beside her, and something sad crossed her expression. Then I hope you make good use of whatever time you have left. She rode back to join her companions, and the three of them turned east without another word. Tala and Colt watched until they were specks on the horizon, then gone entirely. That was your last chance at peace, Colt said quietly. No. Tala turned to face him. Peace would have been leaving you, giving up what we're building here. That's not peace. That's surrender. This, right here, standing with you against whatever comes, this is the only peace I want. He pulled her close, pressing his forehead against hers. Then we'd better be ready, because they're coming and they're not going to give us much time. They worked through the night, making final preparations. Colt checked and rechecked their ammunition supplies, while Tala set tripwires and early warning systems around the perimeter. They moved through the darkness like ghosts, each knowing their role without needing discussion. As dawn approached on the 11th day, they stood together on the porch, watching the eastern sky lighten from black to gray to pink. Somewhere out there, an execution squad was forming, planning, preparing to end the resistance they represented. How many do you think they'll send? Colt asked. Mira said a dozen. I'd planned for 15. Tala leaned against the porch railing. They'll want overwhelming force to make an example. Show anyone else thinking of leaving what happens to defectors. 15 against 2, not great odds. No, she agreed, but we have advantages. We know the terrain. We're defending rather than attacking, and we're fighting for something that matters more than following orders. Will that be enough? Tala turned to look at him, and in the growing light, Colt saw absolute certainty in her eyes. It has to be, because I'm not going back, and I'm not losing you. So we win, or we die trying. Those are the only options. The day passed with agonizing slowness. They took turns at the windmill platform, watching for any sign of approach. But the horizon remained empty, the land peaceful and quiet in a way that felt ominous rather than comforting. That night they didn't sleep. Instead, they held each other in the darkness, memorizing the feel of being together in case it was the last time they got the chance. Tell me about the life we'll build, Tala whispered. After we survive this, what does it look like? Colt stroked her hair, his voice low in the darkness. We expand the ranch, double the herd, build a proper workshop for you. I've seen how you are with tools and repairs. We could hire a couple hands to help with the heavy work. Maybe... He paused. Maybe start a family, if you wanted that. A family. Tala tested the word. I never thought I'd have that option. In my clan, children were just another obligation, another way to serve the council's needs. She shifted closer. But with you, the idea doesn't terrify me. It feels possible. We'll make it possible, Colt promised. All of it. We just have to survive the next few days. We will. Tala's hand found his in the darkness. We didn't come this far to lose now. The attack came on the 12th night. Tala was on watch at the windmill when the first tripwire alarm sounded, a distant clatter of tin cans from the northern approach. She signaled Colt immediately, 3 long flashes followed by a pause, then 2 short flashes. Multiple contacts, northern sector. But even as she signaled, movement caught her eye to the east. More figures, moving low and fast through the darkness. She adjusted the signal. Contacts from multiple directions. They were being surrounded. Colt's response signal came immediately. He'd seen it too. Fall back to the house, defensive positions. Tala descended the ladder in controlled haste, her heart hammering but her mind clear. This was what all the training had prepared her for. Combat under pressure, tactical thinking when death was seconds away. She ran toward the house in a crouch, using every scrap of cover the darkness provided. Gunfire erupted from the eastern approach, muzzle flashes bright in the night. Bullets whined past her, close enough that she felt the air displacement. She dove behind the water trough, returning fire twice before sprinting the last 20 yards to the porch. Colt was already there, rifle braced against the doorframe, providing covering fire. How many? At least 10 that I saw. Probably more in reserve. Tala slammed the door behind her, dropping the reinforced bar into place. They're coming from north and east, probably south too. Classic encirclement. Then we make them pay for every foot of ground. Colt moved to the window, peering through the firing slit they'd created. Stay low, conserve ammunition, make every shot count. The next hour was chaos wrapped in gunfire and smoke. The attackers probed from multiple directions, testing their defenses, looking for weaknesses. Colt and Tala moved through the house like a well-rehearsed dance, covering different approaches, calling out positions, working as a single unit despite the fear and adrenaline. Tala dropped a man trying to rush the north window, her shot catching him center mass. The body fell away into darkness. "One down," she reported mechanically, already scanning for the next threat. "2 more on the east side," Colt called back, firing twice in rapid succession. One attacker went down, the other retreated. "They're getting cautious." "Good. Let them think twice before charging." Tala reloaded, her hands steady despite the chaos. "How's our ammunition?" "Half gone." "You?" "Same. We need to make them commit or withdraw." A new sound cut through the gunfire, a voice calling from the darkness, amplified somehow to carry over the noise. "Talavirik, this is Commander Saren of the Council Guard. You're surrounded and outmatched. Surrender now and we'll spare the rancher's life." "Liar," Tala shouted back. "You'll kill us both." "The rancher isn't our target. Release yourself to our custody and he lives. You have my word as a commander." Colt grabbed her arm before she could respond. "Don't even think about it." "He's offering you a way out. I don't want a way out. I want you alive and free." His grip tightened. "We agreed. Together or not at all." Tala looked at him, seeing absolute determination in his face despite the fear in his eyes. This man, who'd lived alone for 15 years, who'd built walls specifically to avoid caring about anyone, he was willing to die rather than let her sacrifice herself. "Together," she agreed quietly. Then, louder, to the commander, "Go to hell. We're not surrendering." The answering gunfire was immediate and intense, a full assault from 3 sides simultaneously. Bullets shredded the boarded windows, punched through the walls, filled the house with the screaming whine of ricochets. Tala and Colt flattened themselves on the floor, returning fire when they could, but mostly focused on survival. Something crashed through the eastern window, a burning torch that landed on the floor and immediately set the rug ablaze. Colt scrambled to stamp it out while Tala covered him, firing blindly through the smoke and chaos. "They're trying to burn us out," she called. "Then we give them a different target." Colt finished stomping the fire and ran to the back room. He emerged seconds later with a bundle of rags soaked in lamp oil. "The barn. If we set it ablaze, they'll think we're making a run for it. Concentrate forces there." "While we hold here?" "While we hold here." He moved to the back window, the one that faced the barn, and lit the rag bundle with a match. "Cover me for 3 seconds." Tala laid down suppressing fire while Colt hurled the burning bundle toward the barn. It arced through the darkness, trailing flame, and smashed against the barn's side wall. Within seconds, dry wood caught and fire began spreading. The effect was immediate. Shouts from outside, movement toward the barn, a visible shift in the attackers' positions. They thought it was an escape attempt or a distraction for one. Forces pulled away from the house, converging on the barn. Now, Colt said, while they're focused there, we thin their numbers. They moved to the windows with cold precision, targeting the attackers silhouetted against the burning barn. Tala dropped 2 before they realized their mistake. Colt got 1 more. The survivors scattered, seeking cover, their coordinated assault breaking into confused retreat. Cease fire! Commander Saren's voice cut through the chaos. Fall back. Regroup at position Alpha. The gunfire stopped. Silence fell over the ranch except for the crackling roar of the burning barn. Tala and Colt watched from the windows as the attackers withdrew to the eastern fence line, out of effective rifle range, clustering around their commander. They're regrouping, Tala said, breathing hard, planning their next move. Or giving up. Colt reloaded his rifle. We've taken down at least 4, wounded probably 2 more. That's nearly half their force gone or compromised. Not the easy victory they were expecting. The Council doesn't accept failure. They'll try again. Then we'll be ready again. He turned to look at her, and despite the smoke and fear and exhaustion, he smiled. You fight pretty well for someone who is just a weapon. You don't fight badly yourself for someone who is just a farmer. She crossed the room and kissed him hard and quick. Don't get killed. I have plans for you. Before Colt could respond, a new voice carried across the darkness. Not Commander Saren this time, but someone else. Someone familiar. Tala, it's Riker. Don't shoot. Tala moved to the window, peering through the firing slit. The tracker who'd visited days ago was walking toward the house from the south, hands raised high, moving slow and deliberate. It could be a trick, Colt warned, or it could be help. Tala made a decision. Cover me. I'm going out. Tala trust me. She grabbed her rifle and moved to the door, sliding back the bar. If he wanted me dead, he could have killed me a week ago. She stepped onto the porch, rifle ready, while Riker continued his slow approach. He stopped 10 feet away, still holding his hands up. Thought you might need some help, he called. Why would you help us? You work for the Council. Worked for the Council. Riker lowered his hands slowly. Past tense, I quit. Told them I was done hunting people who just wanted to be free. They didn't take it well, tried to arrest me for dereliction of duty. So I left. Figured you'd understand that choice. What do you want? To even the odds. He gestured toward the eastern fence line. Commander Saren has 8 effectives left, plus 2 wounded who can still shoot. He's planning a dawn assault, full frontal attack with fire support. He's going to rush you with everything he has. Casualties be damned, because bringing you back matters more to him than his people's lives. How do you know this? Because I was out there with them until an hour ago. I volunteered as a scout, got the full briefing, then slipped away while they were watching your barn burn. He lowered his hands completely. I can help you. I know their tactics, their weaknesses, and I'm a damn good shot. Tala studied him, weighing the risk against the potential gain. Behind her, she heard Colt move to the doorway, his rifle trained on Riker. If you're lying, Colt said quietly, if this is some trick to get inside our defenses, I'll kill you myself. Fair enough. Riker met his eyes without flinching. But I'm not lying. I'm tired of being the Council's hunting dog, and you two remind me why I took this job in the first place. To protect people who needed protecting, not chase down people who dared to want something better. Tala made her decision. Come inside, but slowly. And if you make one wrong move, the rancher's promise stands. Riker climbed the porch steps carefully, keeping his movements visible and unthreatening. Inside, he set down his weapons at Colt's instruction, 2 rifles, a revolver, and 3 knives, and accepted the chair Tala indicated. Talk, she said. Tell us everything. For the next hour, Riker outlined Commander Saren's tactical approach, the weaknesses in his strategy, and the most effective counters. He drew diagrams in the dust on the table, marked firing angles, identified which warriors were most dangerous and which were conscripts following orders without full commitment. 3 of them don't want to be here, he said, pointing to names he'd written. Young recruits who got swept up in the Council's rhetoric but haven't done real violence yet. If you can target the veterans first, the recruits might break and run. That's a big assumption, Colt said. It's combat psychology. First blood changes people, but the anticipation of first blood? That can break commitment faster than anything. Riker looked at Tala. You know this. You were trained the same way I was. She nodded slowly. Separate the believers from the followers. Make the believers pay the price, and the followers lose their nerve. Exactly. Riker stood, moving to the window to look out at the eastern position. Saren's a true believer. So are his 2 seconds, veterans who've served the Council for a decade each. Take them down in the opening exchange, and the rest will hesitate. That hesitation is when you press the advantage. Oh, dawn assault means first light, Colt said, checking his pocket watch. 3 hours from now, maybe less. Then we use those 3 hours to prepare. Tala started pulling out their remaining ammunition, distributing it into strategic positions throughout the house. Riker, you're the best long-range shooter. You take the west window. It has the clearest sight lines to where they'll stage their assault. Colt, your east window, covering the main approach. I'll float between positions, reinforcing whoever needs it. They worked through what remained of the night, each of them knowing this was likely their last stand. The barn had burned down to smoking embers, providing just enough light to see by without exposing their positions. Outside, the attackers remained at the fence line, waiting for dawn, confident in their numerical advantage. As the eastern sky began to show the first gray hints of morning, Riker turned from his window to look at Tala and Colt. Whatever happens, I'm glad I came. Glad I finally chose the right side. Don't get sentimental yet, Tala said, checking her rifle one last time. We haven't won. No, Riker agreed. But we're fighting for something worth fighting for. That's more than I could say for the last 10 years. The first light of dawn broke over the horizon, painting the land in shades of red and gold. And with it came Commander Saren's assault. The attack was everything Riker had warned them about. Coordinated, brutal, overwhelming. The Council warriors came in a line, firing as they advanced, using suppression tactics to pin the defenders while others rushed forward. It was textbook military assault, designed to overwhelm through sheer firepower and momentum. But Riker had been right about one other thing. The defenders were fighting for something that mattered, and that changed everything. Tala's first shot took down one of the veteran seconds Riker had identified, dropping him before he'd advanced 10 feet. The man fell, and the recruit beside him froze, staring at the body in shock. Colt's second shot caught Commander Saren in the shoulder, spinning him around and dropping him to one knee. Not a killing shot, but enough to remove him from the fight. Riker's third shot was the one that broke them. The remaining veteran second, seeing his commander down and his fellow veteran dead, made the mistake of looking back at his remaining forces. Riker's bullet caught him in the chest, and he collapsed without a sound. The recruits saw all 3 of their leaders fall in the opening seconds of the assault. They saw the precision of the defensive fire, the cold effectiveness of people who weren't just fighting to follow orders, but fighting to survive. And one by one, they broke. The first to run was barely 18, throwing down his rifle and sprinting back toward the horses. The second followed, then a third. Within 30 seconds, half of Saren's force was in full retreat, fleeing back east toward the safety of their own territory. The remaining warriors, true believers all, continued the assault, firing as they advanced. But their numbers were down to 4 now, and the tactical advantage had evaporated. Tala moved between positions like a ghost, her shots precise and devastating. Colt held the main approach with steady determination, and Riker provided overwatch, his long-range accuracy picking off anyone who got too close. The fight lasted less than 10 minutes. When it was over, Commander Saren lay wounded but alive in the yard, his remaining warriors either dead or fled. The dawn light illuminated a scene of carnage, bodies sprawled in the dirt, weapons scattered, the smell of gunpowder thick in the air. Tala and Colt emerged from the house cautiously, weapons ready, scanning for any remaining threats. Riker covered them from the window, his rifle tracking their movement. Commander Saren looked up as they approached, his hand pressed against his wounded shoulder. Blood seeped between his fingers, but the wound wasn't mortal. "Kill me and be done with it." "No," Tala said. "You're going to deliver a message for me. I won't betray the Council." "I'm not asking you to betray them. I'm asking you to tell them the truth." She crouched beside him, her voice hard as iron. "Tell them Talavirik fought for her freedom and won. Tell them the rancher stood with her and together they defeated your execution squad. Tell them that if they send anyone else, the result will be the same. They'll never stop. Then they'll keep losing people." Tala stood, But maybe, after enough losses, they'll start to wonder if controlling one person who refused to submit is really worth the cost. Maybe some of them will remember that the whole point of the clans was supposed to be protecting our people's freedom, not enslaving them to council politics. Commander Saren stared at her, something shifting in his expression. "You sound like my sister. She said something similar before she left the clans 3 years ago." "What happened to her?" "I don't know. I never tried to find out." He looked away. "I told myself she was a traitor, that she'd betrayed everything we stood for. But looking at you now, seeing what you've built here, maybe she was just trying to be free, like you." "It's not too late to make a different choice," Tala said quietly. "To stop serving a council that uses people as weapons and calls it honor." "For me?" "Yes, it is. I've given them 30 years of service. I don't know how to be anything else." Saren met her eyes. "But I'll deliver your message, and I'll tell them the truth, that you fought like a warrior defending her home, and we broke against your defenses like waves against rock. Maybe that'll make them think twice. That's all I'm asking." Tala helped him to his feet, surprisingly gentle. "Can you ride?" "I'll manage." Saren looked at the bodies of his fallen warriors, grief evident in his face. "What about them?" "We'll bury them properly," Colt said. "With respect. They were following orders, same as you. That doesn't make them evil, just misguided." Saren nodded slowly, then limped toward where the horses were tethered. They watched him mount with obvious pain, then turn east toward the rising sun. "You think he'll really deliver the message?" Colt asked. "I think he's a man who's starting to question everything he believed," Tala replied. "And sometimes that's enough to change the world." The cleanup took the rest of the day. They buried the fallen warriors in a line south of the ranch, marked with simple stones. Riker said a few words in the clan language, honoring their courage even as he condemned the cause they'd served. It felt right, acknowledging the humanity in their enemies even as they'd been forced to kill them. By evening, the ranch was quiet again. The barn was a total loss, but the house had survived with repairable damage. They'd expended most of their ammunition and would need to restock. But they were alive. They'd survived. More than that, they'd won. That night, the three of them sat on the porch and shared the last of Colt's whiskey, watching the stars emerge in a sky that seemed impossibly vast and beautiful after the violence of the day. "What will you do now?" Tala asked Riker. "I don't know," he admitted. "I'm not welcome with the clans anymore, not after deserting during a council mission, but I'm not sure I belong out here either." "The ranch could use a third hand," Colt said casually. "We're going to need to rebuild the barn, expand operations. Tala's already identified a dozen improvements we should make." He took a drink. "If you wanted to stay, earn an honest living for once, we'd be glad to have you." Riker looked at him, surprise evident on his weathered face. "You'd trust me? After everything?" "You proved yourself when it mattered," Tala said. "You chose freedom over duty, chose to help people instead of hunt them. That's enough for me." "For me too," Colt agreed. "Besides, I've spent 15 years alone. Now I've got Tala. Might as well add one more to the count. Make it a real community." Riker was quiet for a long moment, staring out at the darkened land. When he finally spoke, his voice was rough with emotion. "I'd like that. I'd like that very much." They sat together in comfortable silence as the night deepened around them. Three people who'd been shaped by violence and control, finally finding peace in the simple act of choosing their own path. The weeks that followed brought a transformation to the ranch that went beyond physical rebuilding. They constructed a new barn, larger and better designed than the old one. They expanded the pastures, diverted creek water for irrigation just as Tala had planned, and increased the herd. Riker proved to have the gift for working with horses, gentling even the wildest ones with patience and understanding. But more than the physical changes, the ranch became something none of them had experienced before. A home in the truest sense. A place where people looked out for each other not because orders demanded it, but because they chose to care. Where mistakes were forgiven and strengths were celebrated, and each person was valued for who they were rather than what they could provide. 2 months after the battle, a rider appeared on the eastern horizon. All three of them tensed, hands moving toward weapons, until they recognized Mira riding alone under a white flag. She stopped at the property line and called out, "I'm not here to fight, just to talk." Tala walked out to meet her, Colt and Riker covering from the porch. Mira dismounted, her expression weary but sincere. "The Council sent me to verify Commander Saren's report," she said without preamble. "They needed to know if it was true. If you really defeated an execution squad. It's true. You can see the graves if you doubt it." "I don't doubt it." Mira looked past Tala toward the ranch, taking in the new construction and signs of thriving life. "You've built something here, something worth defending." "Yes, I have. The Council wants you to know they're reconsidering their position. Your victory, combined with Riker's desertion and the recruits who fled, it started conversations they've been avoiding for years. Questions about whether control is really strength or just fear wearing a different name. And some of us are starting to think you had the right idea all along, that maybe real strength comes from choosing your own path, not forcing others to follow the path we've chosen for them." Mira extended her hand. "I can't promise the Council will change overnight, but I can promise they won't send anyone else after you. You've earned your freedom, Tala. You and everyone here." Tala took her hand, gripping firmly. "Thank you. Don't thank me. You did this yourself. You stood your ground and proved that one person choosing freedom can be stronger than a dozen following orders." Mira mounted her horse. "Maybe someday I'll have that same courage. Until then, live well. You've earned it." She rode away and Tala stood watching until she disappeared over the horizon. When she turned back to the ranch, Colt was walking toward her, a smile on his face. "Good news?" he asked. "The best. We're free. Really, truly free. The Council's standing down." He pulled her close, kissing her with all the joy and relief and love that had been building over the past months. When they finally broke apart, both were grinning like fools. "So what do we do now?" Tala asked. "Now that we don't have to spend every moment preparing for the next fight?" "Now?" Colt took her hand, leading her back toward the house where Riker waited on the porch. "Now we live. We build the life we talked about in the dark. We turn this ranch into the home we both always wanted but never thought we'd find." "Together," Tala said softly. "Together," he agreed. And together they walked toward their future, leaving the violence and fear and loneliness of their pasts behind them. The frontier stretched endlessly in all directions, harsh and unforgiving and beautiful beyond measure. But they faced it side by side, no longer running, no longer hiding, no longer alone. They'd survived the storm and found something better than safety on the other side. They'd found belonging, purpose, love. They'd found home. As the sun set that evening, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, the three of them sat on the porch they'd defended together and looked out at land they'd claimed not through conquest, but through the simple act of choosing to stay, to fight for something that mattered, to build rather than destroy. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote called out to the gathering night. But this time the sound carried no warning, no threat, just the wild music of a land that belonged to no one and everyone, where freedom was the only law that truly mattered. And in a small ranch house beneath an endless sky, three people who'd been broken by violence and isolation finally understood what it meant to be whole. Not because they'd won a battle, but because they'd won something far more important. They'd won the right to write their own story, to choose their own fate, to live on their own terms in a world that had once tried to dictate every aspect of their existence. The frontier remained harsh and unforgiving, but they faced it together, and that made all the difference. The land endured, the people endured, and in enduring they transformed survival into something greater. They transformed it into a life worth living.